Started webinar on getting started routes to publishing. I'm really pleased to have Dr. Paul Crampton with us, who amongst other things is co-editor-in-chief of The Clinical Teacher, which is probably one of the 3 leading medical education journals internationally. Paul may correct me on that, but that's my impression. So very warm welcome. My name's Hugh Alberti. I'm a GP and Professor of General Practice Education at Newcastle University. And just for those of you, maybe you've come along for the first time, just to give you a minute's background on what this webinar is about and the context, is that the NIHR have appointed an incubator in clinical education research. Basically, it was some funding to help try and get more clinical education research off the ground. And we know that particularly for busy clinical educators and even non-clinical educators, sometimes it's a bit daunting to step into research, and you may be in a context institution where there's not much going on or just don't know where to start. So one of the series we run as part of this incubator is the Getting Started series. So this is very much for novices, for those who may be just starting out in research. If you are experienced, then I'm sure you'll learn stuff as well. But we do run some other courses. There's a Mastering the Basics course for kind of moderate level educators. And then we also run some webinars for supervisors and for more senior academics as well. And they are all on the website. We'll put up the slide for the website at the end, but I think you probably have already had access to it to enable you to sign up for this webinar. The other thing to mention about the website is that previous year's webinars are uploaded on there and previous year's slides. And also this year's webinar is being recorded, as you will see. And that will give us a week or so, but that will also be up on the webinar for your information if you want to look back. So you don't need to ask us for it. A couple of other things to say is that we, wish we had time to go around all 32 of us and find out who you are and where you work and what you do. But for the sake of time, we won't do that. But we ask if people are happy to, just in the chat box, just pop your name, where you work, and who you are, and you might find other people. I'm just nosy, so I'm interested, but you might find there's other people or colleagues, someone down the corridor who's also here that you could collaborate with. So feel free to do that if you're happy to do so. Regarding feedback and certificates, we don't automatically send them, but again, the email address, which we'll put up at the end if you do need a certificate of attendance and would like to give us any feedback, then we'd be keen to hear from you and would be very happy to send through a certificate. I think that's, I'm looking at my crib list because I always forget something to say at the beginning, but I think that's everything. Oh yes, no, I forgot to say about this is a monthly webinar we've been having, and this is towards the end of the academic year. And so there's only one more webinar for this academic year next month, 15th of June. We're discussing how to develop a career in clinical education research. But the good news is all the other fantastic webinars, if you've missed any on how to develop a research question, how to do literature review, how to do qualitative and quantitative analysis and data collection, then they're all on the website and they're likely to be rerun again next autumn. So do have a look out for those. And I think that's everything I've got to say. How we run these, and this has been from feedback from previous years, is that obviously many people are busy and like just half an hour of facts delivered, and that's what Paul's going to be doing. And then after that, there'll be opportunity for questions and answers, which is, so if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat box. But then at the end, we'll go through any questions in the chat box or just ask you just to raise an electronic hand. And it's always nice to see you if you've got questions at the end. So feel free to ask at the end. And I think that's the end of my blurb. So I will shut up and hand over to Dr. Paul Crampton to take us from here. Paul, welcome and thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to the session today. It's great to see so many of you join, and yeah, it's good to put your institutions, kind of where you're from, into the chat as well, so we can get a sense of the group as well that are here. So I'm going to talk through today around publishing. So like you said, I'm co-editor of Clinical Teacher, so I'll go through Clinical Teacher in a bit of detail, but also a bit of an overview within the field as well. The challenge often, with academia, the world in which, the kind of the publications are framed, and if you're looking to kind of develop careers in this way, the publication standards are kind of the way in which we still kind of adhere to mostly in terms of like promotions and job applications. Often your kind of publication record is a key part of this, but we are kind of seeing new and kind of diverse ways of sharing, innovation and research as well. So although this talk is mainly around publishing itself, but in terms of academic careers, there are many ways in which you might be able to kind of share your work, to kind of think about how it can reach others, what might be transferable, and the learning from that, in terms of your own specialty and profession, but also how it might apply to other professions as well. So in terms of writing as a process, as an activity, just kind of how do you kind of think of this, when you kind of know that this is the way in which we are looking at things? Do you consider writing to be painful, or is it something that's more enjoyable? So again, you can maybe just put this into the chat to kind of A, B, C, D, whether you consider writing to be, kind of painful. I'd rather a fork in the eye, B, delightfully unpleasant, it's not so bad, or I love it. Again, it's just interesting to see the kind of the range, the scope, kind of where people feel that they sit in relation to this. So yeah, see a few C's, A's, B's, bit of a mixture there. Not seeing many D's so far, not many creative writing or people that are more into the English side of things. Yeah, a mixture of C's. So yeah, so you can see there that there are kind of people at different places in terms of how they feel, and probably at different stages within your career, you might kind of change as well, different projects, and kind of how you find that writing to be. But it's something, that everyone grapples with, and it is a skill like everything else. It's something that you learn the more that you kind of practice and learn the techniques. The ways in which to kind of write is very much something, it's not a kind of natural, but it's something that you can kind of build on as well. And something I've given this talk a few times that often people, speak to me afterwards about in terms of their own development, is kind of where they sit within this field and kind of how they relate themselves, to kind of what's going on, whether they feel that they belong part of this, whether they're kind of from the outside, and really this kind of imposter syndrome, which I mean, it applies in a lot of walks of life, but I think particularly within kind of academia, often, clinicians not feeling that they're really kind of in the academic world, and kind of non-clinicians, vice versa, don't feel that they have the clinical expertise to kind of comment on topics and issues. And really this reflects the state of kind of the field more broadly as well, in terms of the range of disciplines that are involved, the different insights, which all kind of has implications for kind of how we feel we belong, our voice within that, and what we can contribute. And really, I'm just trying to put this forward in terms of saying that the field of kind of health professions education is very open, and often people, we value that diversity in terms of bringing these different lenses and understandings, and really we're kind of everybody's at some different point. And even people that are experts would still say that they have lots to learn in terms of different understandings. So really just to encourage people to get involved, and not feel that, this is kind of, only one kind of approach is needed, but, it's kind of an open subject, I'd say, in terms of the way in which it's being shaped and the publications that are involved within this area as well. There's lots of scope. So in this talk, I'm going to talk through some of the journals, go through some of tips in terms of authorship, and then also in terms of the clinical teacher, more specifically, the article types, and then kind of further support and development that's available. Before I go into journals, so just thinking about you yourself as an academic, as an educator, a researcher, it's often helpful to think about where do you place yourself in terms of your own kind of journey and projects, so whether you're kind of more involved with the teaching side of things, whether you're looking at research specifically in terms of concepts, trying to understand, things that you might have seen in practice, kind of issues, and then learning about that, kind of basing your research on your practical experiences. And then again, maybe you've had practical experience and then you want to teach others to kind of learn through that as well. So it's really important to kind of think, where am I as an academic, as a scholar? Where do I sit more comfortably? And what types of things might I be looking at? The gaps there in terms of different understandings, whether it's theoretical, practical, the integration of these qualitative and quantitative tools and techniques. There's lots of different implications that just having these understandings about our own position, kind of sometimes it's called reflexivity in terms of your own understandings, and how that might then shape you as a researcher. And this is quite important because lots of journals have different scopes and focus. And if we're kind of clear on ourselves, kind of what we are trying to achieve, what we want to be with our research projects, then it can help us align this with the journals as well. As again, they often sit at different places on these types of kind of understandings around kind of what's happening. So within health professions education, there's more and more journals kind of every year that are being developed, and the scope really is changing as well. So some of them are more broadly across educational fields, some are more conceptual, some are practical, some are specific specialties, and sometimes certain techniques as well. So there's really a broad range of different ways, different audiences that you can reach in terms of the journals. Some might be local, national, and international, and all of these kind of outputs, kind of characteristics, have quite a strong influence on what type of work they might publish and where you want to publish, where you want to share your work as well. So having to think about, who is the readership for this journal? Will they learn, what I want them to learn from my piece of work in terms of taking that forward? Or is there a more kind of specific journal perhaps that might be of more benefit in terms of learning from your work? So when you're thinking about your projects, trying to think about the audience, whether you're looking at a broader audience or more specialized, thinking about who reads that journal, is it appropriate? Will it get the understanding? Will it reach the people that you'd really like to be able to look at your work? Speaking to others within the field, so what other people might suggest in terms of the journals to go to. And looking at perhaps like the references, kind of where people are publishing, where the topic is mainly kind of framed and informed. All this can kind of really help you decide who might be the best audience and the best type of journal. And often with the work, with publications and manuscripts, it's thinking about the best home for your work. So trying to find the right place and where it fits in relation to these different type of thoughts and considerations in terms of what you're looking at. So you might want to look at things such as the reputation of the journal, kind of how quickly they might turn around manuscripts, the acceptance rates, the types of reviews that they might be getting in. You might want to look at the types of articles that the journal is publishing, whether it publishes the types of things that you're looking at. The key messages, so how that's kind of streamlined. There are some journals with much longer word count, so you have more space to go into some of the arguments, and then some are very focused, and that can be the challenge in terms of really getting your messages down into kind of 2,000 or 3,000 words. There's things such as publishing metrics, so the impact factor, kind of how often different articles have been cited within the journal, the altometrics, so kind of how often people are downloading them and looking at them across different media platforms as well. So all these kind of might play into how much exposure you might get with different journals, and the audience again, whether it is certain types of people, locations, people interested in certain topics. And then also thinking about the rigor that's involved within the study. So certain journals again might pay more attention to particular aspects of studies, whether it's the methods or the approach, or the topic itself. So there's a kind of a bit of a balance between different journals in what they might look at as well. whichever journal you do pick, make sure that you're really looking closely at the author guidelines. So make sure that you're ensure that you're kind of aligning with the article types that they might have set out. It kind of fits into that guidance, looking for previous examples of what they might have published recently to kind of see how your work can fit into that. As the publication world, is challenging. So you might, if you have submitted it to one place and then you might submit it to another journal, just try and make sure that you're learning from each time you are submitting it. Try to refine it and focus it, so it's more tailored to each of the journals rather than just, putting the same thing into multiple journals, but really try to make it specific to that journal. Lots of the journals these days offer free format submission, so you don't need to format it in a particular way, but they often still have quite strict guidance in terms of the sections or the different parts that they would expect to be present within a manuscript as well. So just making sure you pay close attention in terms of that. In terms of the clinical teacher, so for those who haven't seen this journal, so it's been around quite a while now, since 2004. It's owned by the ASME Association Study of Medical Education, and also Wiley as the publisher, so kind of joint ownership. It's a kind of goes alongside with medical education as they're both owned by ASME and Wiley. The journal itself, it is multi-professional, so it's not just medicine, but it's open to the full range of health professions, and also an international journal. So we've got authorship and publications from quite a broad range across the world in terms of that scope, and that multi-professional angle as well. So things that kind of are transferable across different professions, and making sure that if you've got things around policy and kind of local influence, but also you are explaining that to the international readership. The journal itself is really the kind of the main aims and vision of this is around the practical side of things as well. So often you'll see with journals that they might be quite theoretical, and often those, that have like a longer word count, they can go into that detail. But clinical teacher is aimed kind of at busy kind of clinicians, people who might not be kind of day-to-day academic researchers, but those that might be getting involved with projects, sometimes for the first time as well, and trying to kind of get the practical tips as well. So there's a lot of innovation, practical things, and different types of ways in which people might be involved with scholarship as well. So in terms of the articles, so some of the main ones, we've got the research article type. So this is up to 3,000 words with 30 references and structured with the traditional kind of background methods, findings, discussion and conclusion. We've also introduced a review article type. So this has just come online within the last year or so. And with these, we're kind of hoping to get articles that not only kind of summarize the literature, but then also are kind of looking at practical implications from this as well. So identifying gaps in the literature, but also saying what educators can do as a result of this review. So it's a little bit different to kind of reviews that you might see in other journals. So with this, we've got a strong focus on the implications in terms of what educators can do differently as a result of these literature reviews. And in terms of reviews, we're looking at things that kind of have a method in terms of the way in which they've searched the literature, but it can be open in terms of what type of method that is. So it could be narrative, meta-analysis, systematic review, realist reviews, kind of other types of ways in which you might have looked at the literature, but just making sure that there is a method there that kind of underpins the approach. We've also got the practical side, so the 1,500 words for innovation, implementation and improvement. And this is where a lot of evaluation type studies will kind of mostly be. So things that might be innovative in a local context and setting. And this kind of gives you the chance to kind of talk through particularly the design, the implementation and evaluation of an actual intervention itself. So here the focus really is more on the intervention rather than the research, because often we see a lot of manuscripts presented where the focus really is on the intervention. So it's not necessarily novel in terms of the research approach and the method, but it's really that innovation of a teaching approach. And that's why it's a shorter word count. It's just 1,500 words, to try and give that focus in terms of what people are learning and how others can kind of learn from this understanding as well. With all of these, we kind of expect that it will have met ethical standards as well. So if you're thinking about, doing a publication, please make sure to kind of look into your local ethical permissions, if you're kind of going to be looking at that, because the sharing of data needs to be approved. In some instances, it might be exempt, but you need that confirmation from your local ethics committee in terms of if you are wanting to present and publish in the journal. The innovation articles as well are structured slightly differently. So it's background, approach, evaluation, and implications. So again, this is a bit different to a research study in the way in which it is put together and shaped. We've also got more kind of practical perspective articles. So these won't necessarily be underpinned by an empirical research study, but we've got things such as the Clinical Teachers Toolbox. And this is where information, literature, insights, kind of studies are brought together to try to give educators different tools and ways of approaching a different situation. And so there's some really kind of useful toolbox publications that have been put out there by the journal in terms of different topics and different approaches, so people can really kind of pick these up and get to know the key insights from the literature in a really quick way, but then also having some really practical tips that they can implement through reading these articles. We've also got the how-to, which is a bit more kind of research informed guidance, and again kind of how to do things in terms of different approaches that might be used, again, structured approaches in terms of putting that together. We have viewpoint article, which might be the chance to kind of give you the chance to describe kind of personal insight, and then also linking that with literature, and things that you might be thinking about and discussing with people, being able to kind of put that out there as a way to kind of maybe move understandings forward. And kind of thinking about, again, multi-professional angles, so not just within one specialty, but how this might apply to others. And we have a conference perspective article type, which gives people the chance to share any learning and reflections you might have from attending or organizing a recent kind of educational conference as well. So there might be kind of a local conference that you've been to, and there might be key things there. So again, we're keen to kind of help people to share those. So kind of tell us what you've learned, how that might be relevant to people in other kind of countries, and what kind of things are being talked about within conferences. So this is quite a new article type as well. So it'd be great to kind of get submissions into that one. In terms of early careers, so getting involved, the journal itself is very much trying to help people with their own journey. So we have an early career scholarship section, a special issue that you can select when you're making your submission. So please do let us know, if you've undertaken your study as part of a master's or a PhD. You can kind of then put this in the cover letter, make sure it's clear when you're uploading on the submission. And then we'll try to kind of look at it in a bit more detail in terms of giving that formative feedback. Hopefully your supervisors will have helped as well, but this section kind of gives you that chance as an early career researcher to kind of get a bit more detailed guidance. And then also, if you maybe have passed that stage, you may be doing it at the postdoctoral level, so you might have finished your PhD. Again, we've got a current special issue around postdoctoral issues. So this might be research that you've done as a PhD student or as an MD student, or as a postdoc. So things that are kind of interesting or challenging at this level, and also things that might help with careers in this area, any kind of innovation, ways that you might be able to support other postdoctoral, this community at this level as well. So this is a current special issue that is running, is open for submissions until June, but I think we're going to actually extend that a little bit further, so you do have more time if you've got work that you might think might be relevant to that special issue as well. When you're making your submission, making sure you're kind of going through the process. Like I've said before, a lot of the submission platforms now do use the free formatting. The process itself, when you submit your piece of work, it will go through initial screening, so checking that the work is kind of fitting the right standards. So the editorial office would check that in terms of, what was submitted. Does it kind of meet the right kind of formatting standards in terms of the length or the quality of figures, those kind of issues, whether all the information is presented. There'll be checks for kind of plagiarism. It goes into the kind of the software Turnitin, like different institutions have set up as well. The online submission system will then kind of be able to be reviewed by different editors as they're kind of making the decisions and going through the information. You will kind of check all the parts of the manuscript, so making sure that you're looking at the authors that are listed, making sure that the keywords are all there, carefully kind of going through. But the whole process now has been enhanced really by the kind of the updates with the systems. In the past, it used to be very kind of painful in terms of making sure that your title adhered to, a certain number of characters and you fit all the sections into the boxes. But these days you kind of click it and it uploads it all automatically. But you still need to kind of double check that it's got the right information there. Just to kind of give a brief kind of word on the usage of AI. So the Wiley kind of organization has policies around the use of AI in manuscripts, and it's something that we're seeing now in terms of authors, but also not just of manuscripts, but also of peer reviewers as well. The Wiley policy is that people should not be kind of uploading manuscripts into platforms to undertake reviews. So although the AI can be used in certain ways to kind of assist with the process, but there are kind of lines in terms of, the generation of text and the ways in which it's being used. Really, we're asking for kind of transparency, so making sure that if AI has been used, you're acknowledging that, and it's clear in, the ways in which it has been done. AI can't be an author is often a question, an area as well. So, the human has to have responsibility and oversight of what is being kind of put forward. But we're not kind of naive to say, that nobody should be using this. And it's really just finding the balance between, what's appropriate, the ways in which it's being used, but also kind of advancing the field as well. So just being mindful, really make sure you're looking at the policy about what is, within that, what's outside of the scope, and being, honest about if you are using this in certain ways. The journal, is, as we've kind of got these approaches, we're kind of working with them. We're not saying, people shouldn't be using them, but it's just using them responsibly in the right kind of way that really the field is still developing and people are kind of learning and hopefully, things are improving the best way that they can be in terms of those efficiencies. But we're not kind of stopping things, for the technology as well. So trying to find that balance. In terms of your work, so how do you actually make, the appeal in terms of things kind of being effective, increasing your chances of publication? So just for example, our innovation section. So like I said earlier, making sure that you're looking closely at the author guidelines in terms of the structure, the word counts, the references, everything that's kind of related to that. You've got a much better chance if you're already meeting these things that you can kind of be in control of, at the time of submission. So just carefully going through this, making sure that you stick to these as best you can, so that it fits the journal style and approach. For an innovation, make sure you're describing it clearly. So thinking about the intervention itself, you've got the learning outcomes, thinking about the learners being clearly identified. What are the key lessons that people learn from the experience that you've learned as an author developing an initiative or kind of researching it? Thinking about what information has changed, how things have improved, and then also thinking about what other people can learn from reading about your intervention. How could it be relevant to other settings? And this part is key, for interprofessional, international journals, that it has that relevance, that really helps to kind of change how people might think about different topics. When you're writing your background and your approach, the setting out kind of why something is needed, the kind of the so what question is really important. So tackling this problem gap hook, which was articulated by Lorelei Lingard. And she's written a whole kind of series around kind of how to effectively write and communicate your ideas. So I'd suggest to have a look at her work. There's a book as well that's available. And this really helps to think about establishing kind of why something is important and its relevance to other people as well. And often people can question this in the reviews. So, if people don't understand from the outset what the problem is, then really it can make something quite challenging to then communicate, why this should be published, why it should be prioritized. A few years ago, at Medical Education, there was an article where some of the deputy editors kind of put together some thoughts on, again, what kind of helps people to get published. So I'll just run through some of these. So things such as looking at the journal aims, the alignment between the objectives and the mission, asking yourself, does my study really fit within this journal, and how it might appeal to this journal style and approach. Looking closely at the abstracts, so making sure that you really think about each word. Often it can be the main thing that people are reading, so getting the abstract right is really important. And in terms of that summary, what are the key parts? Do you have your keywords there, and is the kind of problem and challenge identified clearly so that people understand kind of why this work was done and what it helped to add? And often within the field, the word count is restricted, so it can actually be harder to write these more succinct papers, rather than giving the chance for a longer paper. So it can actually be more challenging, with a much shorter word count. Thinking about your title and your abstract. So again, trying different things, trying different types of words, and the refinement of this, and it's kind of your elevator pitch that you're describing your work. So it's something that you need to work on, to try and make sure that you've got your terms and your phrases there. It's succinct but also clear, and might explain to kind of somebody who's not as familiar with the topic, but they're able to kind of pick up the key kind of parts of this. In terms of the writing itself, trying to make sure that you convince the reader of the need for the study, so that's really kind of clear and throughout. Making sure you've got terminology explained, again, people from across professions, areas might have different understandings, so trying to get people onto the same page in terms of what they understand. And also thinking around different perspectives. So if you were to kind of take, a different approach in terms of whether it was cognitive, behavioral, socio-cultural, kind of how that might impact on your understanding in terms of, the way in which you might have framed your research questions, the data and the analysis kind of interpretation that you might have had. So trying to take those different things into what you're looking at. And then in terms of support and development, so just kind of hot off the press, really, I guess, this month in the issue in Clinical Teacher, we've written a clinical education scholarship and research getting started. So there's a link there, and we'll make the slides available as well. And with this, so we just put a few things in here. So things such as mentorship, so trying to identify people kind of perhaps locally within your institutions or kind of more broadly within your geographical areas. Trying to get research interests that might be kind of your particular domains that you might want to look at in more detail, trying to narrow it down in terms of, what are you really interested in, and how can you add to that literature? Kind of why are you interested in that topic? Does it help to fill kind of a gap in the literature? Is it something that's kind of personally of interest, or other things that might inform kind of why you might be working on those research areas? You can undertake formal training, so postgraduate certificates, diploma, MSc. At Hull York Medical School, we've got an MSc program, and often, medical people that are undertaking the MSc will undertake a research project, which then they look for publications for afterwards. So often these kind of formal training opportunities can give you that chance to spend a bit more time, go into depth in terms of your understandings of research methods and integrity. And often if you can get that research design it kind of at the beginning you get that right, it's much easier to then find those publications rather than trying to kind of engineer a publication on the back of a project which you might not have initially developed in a kind of rigorous way. So really trying to have that build up of kind of putting your research proposal together with kind of supervisor peer input can help. The field itself is quite diverse, as I said at the start, and it's really inclusive in terms of the people that are involved in the field. People might go to the ASME conferences, the next one in July, and it's really again, it's kind of an open, a lot of people know each other within the community and kind of valuing each other's voice, whether you're kind of new to the field or you're very established. It's really the chance for everybody to kind of belong in different ways. And hopefully I think that's reflected within the literature, within the journals as well, the kind of that network within kind of health professions education, that people do belong in different ways and trying to embrace that kind of diversity. There's the kind of the recommendation about networking, so getting involved as much with different conferences, different groups, networks, whether it's particular topics or studies, trying to always kind of get involved, meeting people. And with this, you can kind of hear about more and more kind of opportunities, different awards or grants, looking again kind of locally, what you might have, and nationally, internationally, kind of other opportunities as well, being familiar with some of those. And things such as a journal club are a really good way, again, to kind of look in more detail at particular topics and issues, and something you can maybe start if there isn't one, with kind of people at the same stage as you to kind of look at journals and just have these kind of open conversations about articles. And then sharing your work when you can discuss it with others, presenting at any chance, in terms of posters and oral presentations, and just really being able to share your work in different ways, again, can help you build up some of these networks. And within the clinical teacher, so we've got this New Voices in Health Professions Education Award, and this has been running annually since 2021. It will open again quite shortly, and then closes around September time. And this is a monthly online series which we look in more detail around the publication world in terms of peer reviewing, and you get to meet different editors from across the journal and looking at a whole range of topics in terms of the different article types, the appeal of different articles, peer reviewing as an individual, as a process, and thinking about how to improve your own written work as well. So it's a really good initiative. There's lots of kind of great conversations. This year we've got a broad range of people from across the world again, so it's great to see. We also have lots of applications as well for this, so it's quite a competitive process. So if you don't get in the first year, please feel free to apply again next year, because it's just something is competitive. But I think the more and more people hear about it, people are applying as well. So yeah, it's kind of helps you in this process, and you might meet people that you can then kind of keep in touch with in the future as well, and see at future conferences, and kind of build up a network through this. Medical education as well, they have an internship, so kind of a smaller number where it goes into more detail around the editorial processes. And there's also support through Wiley around peer reviewing. There's kind of examples and templates and guidance, and also through the ASME Association, you can get involved there. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to spend a bit of time on any discussion. If there's anything you want to go over again, particular things you want me to explain more clearly, or just, yeah, any thoughts, comments, happy to discuss.
Fantastic. That's been really, really helpful, Paul. And I have to confess that even though I've been publishing for a few decades, I still use your slides to give to students and trainees when they ask, what do I do now? So it's been really helpful when someone's asked, and I knew they would, when they could get a copy of the slides. And just mentioned at the beginning that they will be available on our website in about a week. Give us a few days just to upload it. But I very much recommend keeping an eye on it every time you're thinking about submission. Have a look at it. There are a couple of comments, a couple of questions that people have sent in, which we'll highlight. There's a specific question from Aldazir Jacqueline. Are you there? Are you able to put your camera on and actually ask the question? Otherwise, I can.
Hello.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Nice.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you very much, Paul, for an insightful presentation on this. Pathway to publication. So my question is specifically about the perspective papers that you have mentioned. I am, by the way, I am a clinical research nurse and that's focusing on Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis. So as part of our participant engagement and retention, we are conducting an appreciation event for them, which I think not all of the sites, or if I'm not mistaken, not most of the clinical trial units are conducting this type of event for engagement and retention. So I'd like to write a perspective on the importance of this activity. So somehow, like, I'd like to ask for guidelines if there's available.
Yeah. So that sounds like a good kind of initiative, kind of some learning from there for people to kind of understand what was done and maybe detailing, the process that went into it. The perspective article types, I guess, are there in terms of you might not have had kind of ethical approval, in terms of there's no data collection itself, but you might be just sharing, like you've said, something that might have happened and the kind of the process that's gone into that as well that might be of value to kind of other people to learn about. So yeah, the structuring of these articles, because it is kind of 1,500 words, the kind of the scope itself is quite broad, depending on what your focus might be. And so there is a bit more variability in how you might present, whether it is subsections or the way in which that's detailed. It is quite kind of open, really, as long as you're kind of making sure that it's kind of consistent, coherent as an article, has some kind of literature based as well. All these types of things that help it make kind of like an academic piece of work as well can all help with that. But it doesn't have to, stick to kind of the background methods results discussion in the same type of way. It can be more, depending on the topic itself, the way you might explain it. As it's, the practical journal, I think we always like infographics, figures, tables, all those types of things that people like to kind of break up. Text can all help to make the appeal of something and get the information across quickly and clearly as well, kind of always helps. So if you can produce those types of things, takeaway points, I think often, clinical teachers often look at those. So things like that can really help as well. But yeah, it sounds like a good initiative to kind of share with others.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks. Mohammed El Soud, Mohammed, are you there? Do you want to ask your quick little question? If not, you might be in a place where you can't put your video or volume on. So the question there, you might be able to see it, Paul, on the chat is, would you also support publishing case reports or series?
So I think the journal, I suppose, is primarily kind of an educational journal. So we are looking for things that are kind of improving the education side. So rather than kind of clinical or practical, things in terms of developments, within certain clinical situations. So as long as there's an educational focus in terms of, something that might be different that's done within that, that would be kind of the main remit. So making sure that it fits into that in terms of that scope, rather than any kind of clinical focused work, because it's really an educational journal. So what other educators can learn through that process, and if the example does kind of lend itself to a teaching example, then yes, that could be okay. But it needs to make sure it's not just kind of purely like a clinically orientated case, I guess.
And I think probably I would read a case report in clinical work would be equivalent to an innovation paper potentially in medical education work. Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
yeah, and just answer. We'll put the link to the website in the chat box, but also we'll show a slide at the end. In fact, I'm sure Marta will be doing that anyway. But if we'll pop the link to the website and the email address in the chat box. It's not. Oh, and anyone else who's got questions, please just pop up the electronic hand if you wish to, and or pop it in the chat box. I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, Paul. And actually, it wasn't a question; it was a comment from someone saying, I'm going to paraphrase it. It's a pain in the neck to have to change all your formatting, bibliography, references when you when you decline from one journal and have to submit to another. Is there any chance that journals will decide on a consistent approach to formatting and referencing in the future, or is that my dream, what I dream about, and will never happen in reality?
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of has changed to an extent. So we do now offer this free format submission. So both clinical teacher and medical education through the kind of the Wiley interface in terms of what you put together. So it doesn't matter, what formats you're using in terms of the fonts, the size, you can put those in. And then the journal itself kind of either as part of the uploading process, it might be able to kind of alter things, or at the kind of the stage where it goes from approval into the publication, the copy editing part, it would kind of stylize it into the journal. So in terms of the references, you don't actually need to necessarily fit the prescribed ones, but you just need the consistency. So, don't start using Harvard and then go to Vancouver for your list. Just make sure that you're kind of using either, Harvard or Vancouver. The kind of the style, making sure that you've got that consistency. Because it would then get changed, at the copy editing stage. So you don't actually have to do that, but you need that consistency because the ways in which it's kind of uploaded and used will have that difference. And then just in terms of like numbering and sections, again, you can do that, or you can kind of see the examples, but it's not kind of automatically, not looked at if it doesn't use like a certain numbering or a certain font, certain kind of margins and things. So yeah, it kind of has moved on in some way, but not all journals have done that. I guess Wiley, we've got the advantage the way in which it's been used, the platform. It's been in place for a couple of years, the research exchange system, and the way in which you kind of put it, you upload your manuscript and then automatically it kind of populates these fields. But other submission platforms at journals, they don't always do that. So it's kind of moved things forward quite, in quite a good way. But still, I think if you think about yourself as a reviewer as well, if a reviewer, you're more comfortable perhaps if a manuscript comes through that looks like it belongs in that journal, you're probably more likely to, kind of take favor with how that has been written and the approach as well. So it's kind of up to you, but yeah, kind of looking at the style of the journals, I'd say is always important as well, kind of how it fits within that.
Yeah, so progress. And
Yeah.
it's on its way, and it's certainly definitely easier than it used to be, and hopefully that will continue. So that's hopeful. I have another question, Paul, which although it risks you just saying, well, just look at my first 3 slides, Hugh, because that's what I was trying to get over. But I'm just picturing someone who's done their first educational research project, and I think someone who's just had something published, and congratulations to them, but they've just done their first educational research project. They've occasionally read the journals, but not really fully aware of them. What would your top tips be to then decide where on earth do I try and get this published? How would you? I know that's, look back on the slides for a more detailed answer, but a 2-minute top tips to how to decide where to try and get it published for someone who's completely new and not aware of what's out there.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of the the elevator type pitch of like a 2-minute description. So if you were to kind of get in an elevator with somebody to describe your work, what would you focus on, and what would you say your key kind of messages? And then if you can kind of think, learn from what you're saying there as what are your key points, and then trying to align that then with a journal. So kind of what journal kind of, would want to listen most to that story, to that elevator pitch that you're giving. And probably, having that yourself in terms of, I want people to understand this. This is my, my proudest thing about this work is that I want people to know this part. And then, going to your journal to then say, this is how, this is what we're looking at. This is what we're doing. Rather than it being the other way around, you don't really want the journal to drive what you're doing. You want, your exploration, your work, your findings, what you're kind of proud of in terms of what you've looked at and your study. And if you only publish like one thing from this piece of work, what do you want it to be? What do you want it to be known for? And then taking that and then looking, how that aligns with different journals, looking at their kind of aims and their scope and what they publish, their article types and examples of what they've published recently as well. So trying to kind of, align those different things, I think would be a good way. And yeah, and that persistence, we always talk about, it's a difficult world, it's a challenge. Everybody faces, the rejection at some point, with different articles. It's just kind of learning through that and just, not being put off, but really keep trying and keep learning, from the process, any feedback that you get and trying to improve what you're doing, thinking about how, what were the gaps and how could you improve things, and yeah, not taking it personally. I think it's just a difficult world, but it's something we just have to go through, and everyone faces these challenges with it.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you don't mind, I'll add a couple of thoughts to that, just kind of little shortcuts. One is certainly if you're working with others or with your supervisor, and I get probably once a month an email from a student or trainer I'm working with saying, where should we go with this? And so definitely ask others and get advice because sure, by supervisors, more experienced researchers will not mind offering some advice. And secondly, I always suggest that you look down the list of references and where similar topic papers have been published, and they were probably the journals to start with and to look at, because they're obviously interested in the content of what you're talking about. So that's obviously a nice little shortcut. And then a long cut, as in this isn't an easy answer. And Paul's not paid me to say this, but I would just encourage you, when you have time, to flick through some of the education journals, not just to think, oh, where can I get something published? But actually just by reading journals, you kind of pick up reading papers, you pick up style, you pick up, many of us have got a very biomedical background, and it's actually social science is a different language. And so you pick up styles, ways to write things, ways to put things. And also you'll pick up a general, yeah, okay, you can read through the fantastic list that Paul and other editors provide of what they're looking for. But actually, if you don't mind me saying, Paul, I find it much easier by just reading the things that you've published and think, okay, that's the type of thing they're looking for, and that is going to get published. So I would encourage people in your spare time, when you're not doing anything else, have a, keep up to date with some of the medical education journals. And actually, you might learn something, and I do regularly. So that'd be my last tip.
Yeah, that's it. You kind of learn, what are the gaps in the literature as well through that approach. So you're seeing the style, but you're also feeding into a conversation about, what the journal is having, and eventually you'll if you keep reading the papers, you'll see that often they point to the similar issues and topics as well, kind of gaps in the literature. So you can really use that as a basis to kind of, build your work and think about how does it improve the journal.
Yeah, and then give you ideas for your next research project if you've not been put off too much from the first one. Well, unless anyone else has got any questions, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope that was helpful. In the chat box, fantastic. Thank you, Marta. As if by magic, it appears. There's a link there with a QR code to the next webinar in our series next month about developing a career in MedEd. and the website there is for looking at previous years, or if you give us a few days to upload it, then this session from Paul will be uploaded as well. And then finally, the email address is there, and so if anyone wants a certificate or wants to give us some feedback, we'd love to hear it. That would be really helpful. So thank you very much. Enjoy your publishing and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. And thanks again, Dr. Crampton, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martha.